Dave Talks Comics, episode 48, Cartoon Talk and Gambit. Dave Talks Comics is a podcast on the subjects of comic books and cartoons. I talk about comics I have read and cartoons I have watched. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com. On Twitter, at Dave Talks Comics. Email can be sent to dave at davetalkscomics.com. I talk from my notes on these comics. I don't go panel by panel. I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This podcast is not spoiler-free. I try not to spoil everything, but in the process of talking about these comics and cartoons, I may spoil them in some way. On this episode, I will be talking about some of the cartoons that I watched not too long ago, specifically episodes of Justice League Unlimited, Avatar, and Futurama, yes. And then I will also be talking about the Gambit miniseries from the early to mid 1990s. Cartoon Talk. First one I want to talk about the cartoons that I watched this past week. The first one I watched was an episode of Justice League Unlimited. Unlimited? I think that's what it is, JLU. And it was the 12th episode of the first season, and that is the Once and Future Thing Part 1. And this was a two-parter, and I'm just going to talk about the first part. This is a story where the main characters, the members of the JLU are Batman, Wonder Woman, and Green Lantern, John Stewart, of course. And the main villain is a guy named Kronos. Now, this is a version of Kronos I'm not familiar with. I'm not really that familiar with the original version of Kronos, who was a guy who wore like a green and yellow suit. I think this one is based on a character who appeared in a DC comic series in the late 90s, and I was actually looking into that recently because I believe David Price mentioned it on an episode of 11 O'Clock Comics a few weeks ago. And it doesn't seem like it would be that hard to get a complete run. It was only like 12 issues that it ran for, although one of them was a 1 million issue, which I don't think was the 12th issue. It was like the 10th or the 9th issue. So, anyway, Kronos is a villain who has invented a suit, or actually a belt, that gives him the ability to jump through time. And he jumps onto the Justice League satellite and tries to steal one of Batman's utility belts. And Batman and Wonder Woman and Green Lantern catch him in the act, and he opens a portal in time and jumps through, and they jump through after him, and they wind up in the Wild West. And so this whole episode takes place in the Wild West. While they're back there, they encounter Jonah Hex, they encounter Batlash, they encounter El Diablo, and they encounter a sheriff whose last name is Smith, who is Native American, and at one point was called Powwow Smith, but is no longer goes by that name, and in fact they make a big deal of that at later in the episode. But so those are the characters. Basically, the bad guy Kronos has jumped back in time because of he jumped into the portal at a different time than they did. He actually arrived like 6 months before they did, and he was going to use... I don't think he was going to use his powers to set himself up, but what happened was the local bad guy got his hands on Kronos' time-traveling technology and used it to bring all sorts of weapons to make him all-powerful. And I believe the town they're in is Elkhorn, although I can't remember which state it's supposed to be in, but it's somewhere in the desert southwest. So I'm not sure if this is... Maybe it's Arizona or Nevada. You know what? I think it was Nevada. Yeah, that sounds right. So, okay, so taking a step back, one of the things that I really liked about this episode is some of the dialogue, especially between Green Lantern and Batman. There's a great little exchange early in the episode before they jump back in time where they're talking about women. And Batman is questioning Green Lantern about his romantic life, and because Hawkgirl walks by, and Hawkgirl had just come back into the League just recently, and in the time that of course she was involved with Green Lantern previously, but in the time that she's been gone, Green Lantern has gotten involved with Vixen, and he tries to make it sound like Green Lantern tries to make it sound like everything's going fine, and Batman's giving him this questioning look, and then Green Lantern turns the tables on him and asks him about him and Wonder Woman, and he does a little bit of hemming and hawing, and so it was good stuff, good dialogue, both the way it was written and the way it was delivered by the actors, the voice actors. Which would, of course, be Kevin Conroy playing Batman and Phil LaMarr playing Green Lantern. Let's see, what else do I have here in my notes? I really liked, I liked the use of time travel, and I think I've gotten into that. I mean, there's stuff like the army that the bad guy has. Now, while they're all people from that time period, and I didn't specify, it's probably supposed to be like the late 1800s or something like that. Yeah, that's probably like 18. In fact, I think at one point they even show a newspaper, and I want to say it's like 1879 or something like that. But I mean, there's at one point there's these guys riding on pterodactyls, which turn out to be robots. And then there's guys riding on other dinosaurs, which are also robots. There's a reference to the Jonah Hex episode of Batman the Animated Series, which was basically, there was this episode which basically was a focus on Ra's al Ghul, and which involved Jonah Hex. In fact, I think it may have been the very last episode of Batman the Animated Series, or at least one of the runs of that. Not the new Batman Adventures, but I think the last episode of the original run of Batman the Animated Series. And I guess the only other thing to say about this episode is that it does end on a cliffhanger. And hopefully I'll get around to talking about the next episode in a future in the next episode of Dave Talks Comics. The next episode of JLU on the next episode of Dave Talks Comics. One more thing about the episode of JLU that I watched this week, the Once and Future Thing Part 1, and that's that I've seen this before. I've seen all of JLU before, but this episode, this two-parter in particular, is one of my favorites. And I've probably seen it more than any other episodes of Justice League Unlimited or the original Justice League series. I saw it when it first aired on Cartoon Network. I have rented the DVDs and seen it that way. Before it was released on Netflix streaming, I paid for it on Vudu, which is another one of those streaming web services, so I actually have it there. and of course I'm watching it again now. So, well, I'm not sure if there was any real point to this other than the fact that I wanted to point out that this is one of my favorites, and also to mention that I have seen this before and I know how the next part goes. So I don't have a problem with reviewing just the first part because this is a retread, and a recent retread. I probably watched it previously. I don't know, sometime in the last few years. Last 2-3 years, I'd say. Yeah. So that's all I wanted to say. That's all I wanted to add about my experience watching and my thoughts on watching JLU Once and Future Thing Part 1. So the next cartoon I wanted to talk about was Avatar. I'm almost halfway through Season 3 of Avatar. I'm enjoying it quite a bit. I'm still not sure if I like it or better than the earlier seasons, but I really liked the most recent episode I watched, which was episode 8 of Season 3, which is called The Puppet Master. And the focus in this episode is really on Katara and the other members of the team, Aang and Sokka, and I'm forgetting the girl who... the Earthbender, what her name is, but they don't play as big a role. But basically, at this point in Season 3, they have been dressed up as members of the Fire Nation, and they encounter this woman who encourages them, an old woman who has an inn, who encourages them to come and stay with her. And it seems there's something that just seemed off about it. And I was right, there was something off about it, but what it turns out that she is a waterbender from the Southern Water Tribe, which is the tribe that Katara and Sokka come from. And she was captured when the Fire Nation attacked. Well, it must have been 50 years, 60 years earlier, because she's an old woman at this point. And she was imprisoned by the Fire Nation, but she managed to escape. And when she learns that Katara is a waterbender, basically she wants to teach Katara the tricks that she learned. And they exchange some information. But what you basically have is... And taking a step back, there are some things about this episode that don't completely work. And I'm not going to go into too many details, but it turns out that she has been kidnapping people and imprisoning them underneath this mountain. And I'm talking about the old woman, has been kidnapping people and imprisoning them under the mountain. And that was a little weird because I wasn't sure what she was doing with them or what the purpose was. I mean, if you dig into it too much, it doesn't make sense. And she seems very it seems a lot of animosity at first towards Katara on her part. And basically the whole idea behind the episode is to teach Katara how to bloodbend. And the whole idea, Katara has learned some variations on waterbending, and this is a new variation. And basically the idea is that waterbenders can control anything that's liquid. In the previous episode, I think it was the one just before this one, or maybe the one before that, she had used her own sweat and had Toph. Toph, that's the name of the earthbender that's with them. She had used her own sweat and been able to use that as a weapon. And what the old woman teaches her, and there's some great flashback scenes that show this, is that while she was in prison, they would only give them water when they were very weak. They wouldn't let them touch it. They would only let them, they would chain them up when they were touching it, and so that they couldn't use their hands to control the water, because I guess hand motions are very important to bending activities. And so she eventually learned how to blood bend. First she used it on rats, and then she used it on people, and she did that to force one of her guards to unlock her, and then she escaped. Now, of course, this kind of leaves the questions to, well, why was she the only one who was able to escape? Because she says that she's the only one who ever escaped. That, so once again, there's some plot holes here. But I guess the other thing that I really need to say is that this whole relationship between her and Katara kind of reminded me of something from The Empire Strikes Back, where Darth Vader is trying to get Luke to join the dark side. And it was this this is the way it has to be, which is what Darth Vader would say, and Luke said, no, that's not right, that's not what I was taught, and I really got that vibe, and I thought that was very cool, that it brought that whole thing up. The idea is that it doesn't matter what you do, it's what you're trying to do. In other words, the ends justify the means, and Katara saying, no, it doesn't, and it wasn't exactly like that in this episode, but there was definitely a sense of that there, and there was enough of that it excited me, and that I thought it was really cool. So that's it for that episode and for that cartoon. The only other cartoon that I watched was Futurama. I'm in the middle of, I'm early in the 6th season of Futurama. And so far, I've got to say that all of the episodes have been very good. I love the one with the iPhone, and the 2 before that, although at the moment I don't recall anything about them. This one was about Proposition Infinity, was what it was called, and it was about robosexual marriage. And basically the gist of the plot is that Lisa breaks up with Kip, and ends up with Bender, and which creates a huge stink because robosexual relationships are illegal, and in other words, relationships between a human and a robot. And so the whole episode is about that, kind of focusing on that, and obviously this is they're trying to make a point about homosexual marriage, is what they're trying to make a point about. But I really like the way this was done. And, of course, there's all these little jokes thrown in here and there. There's little sight gags. I ended up pausing and rewinding the episode a few times just to make sure I caught everything that they threw in there. There's a great part where Bender is dragged away to this camp. He and Lisa are separated. Lisa is captured by her parents. Bender is captured by the robot minister and taken to this camp to reprogram him, to rid him of his robosexual ways. And it's just there's just so many good jokes in there. It's an excellent episode. So I guess that's it for Cartoon Talk. That's what I watched this past week, and I'm going to try and do this on a weekly basis going forward. So, yeah, I'm going to try and do Cartoon Talk on a weekly basis. And these are basically the only 3 cartoons I'm watching right now. I think I'm going to take a break from Avatar once I get halfway through the 3rd season. And I think I'm going to jump back to Star Wars Clone Wars, because I stopped that halfway through the 1st season. Futurama I think I'm going to stick with until I get all the way through season 6, I believe. And JLU, I'm probably going to take a break once I get through this next episode, which is this part 2 of Once and Future Thing, which I always thought was the end of the 1st season of JLU, but I guess it was just the end of the first half of the 1st season. But I'm going to jump back to, what's that? Young Justice. Yes, Young Justice. I'm going to pick up with that and continue to watch that for a little bit, and then I'll come back to JLU after that. So that's it for Cartoon Talk for this week. Gambit. The X-Men. Actually, that's not the full name of the series. It's just called Gambit. This is the 1993-94 miniseries or limited series, although they weren't. That was what Marvel early on distinguished their miniseries by calling them limited series. But this was a 4-issue series called Gambit, which ran from the cover dates are December of 93 to March of 94. It was written by Howard Mackie and pencils by Lee Weeks and inks by Klaus Janson. Though recently I heard his name is actually pronounced Johnson. I'm not sure about that. Anyway, I read this not too long ago, and I'm not crazy about it. It's not bad, but it's not great. That's how I would describe it. I really haven't read a whole lot of the X books from this period. Really after the mid-'80s, I would say. I really hadn't read, after about X-Men 183, I think was really the extent of where I've read. I've read a few issues here and there. Since then, I think I might have talked about X-Men 204, was it? Not Lone Wolf, something like that. Or Solo Wolf, something like that. It was an issue that was drawn by Barry Windsor Smith, written by Chris Claremont, of course, which mostly focused on Wolverine. But okay, getting back to Gambit. So this is a story about which focuses mostly on Gambit, although Rogue does play an important role in the story. Although I wouldn't say she's a co-star, she's more of a supporting character. And this introduces, well, actually, I'm not sure if it introduces these things. My guess is that it introduces these things, some of these new elements, which is that Gambit is a thief. And I don't think that's new, but that he is a member of the Thieves Guild. He's from New Orleans, I believe, or at least from Louisiana. And there were apparently 2 guilds there that are at war, I guess. And those are the Thieves Guild and the Assassins Guild. And Gambit is married he has a wife whose name is Belladonna, who, I don't know if this is her first appearance or not. I suppose I could have looked these things up. Maybe I will after I finish recording this. But she is the daughter of the head of the Assassins Guild, and he is I believe the adopted son of the head of the Thieves Guild. And she's sick, and her brother attacks him. And so basically the story boils down to him trying to get his hands on this formula, this healing formula, which hopefully will cure her. And there's some other characters in this, mostly bad guys, like the Tithe Collector. And this story begins at the beginning of the tithing, and so the Tithe Collector is coming to collect from the 2 guilds. And I don't know. I guess this might be a good time to say the story feels very surface level. It doesn't feel very deep. Neither the characters nor the plot. It just feels lacking in those areas. I wish there was more to it. I probably would have enjoyed it more if there was more to it. What I did like the artwork. The artwork is very beautiful. I think the combination of Lee Weeks and Klaus Janson do a great job on this series. The covers are beautiful. The colors, especially on the covers, are great. I'm not sure if there's a whole lot else to say about this. I'm looking through my notes, and I think I've almost covered everything. So, I mean, if you're interested in knowing more about Gambit, Gambit, there's a little bit of, angst between Gambit and Rogue, and Gambit's wife is dying, and Rogue is pining for for Gambit. She's in love with him or something like that. And at one point, Gambit leaves her to look after his wife, and she uses her powers to learn more, because when she uses her powers, of course, she absorbs other people's powers, but she also absorbs their memories. And so then she sees how Gambit and Belladonna, some of their past through Belladonna's eyes, as Belladonna is in bed dying. So there's some of that. I think I read this because I think it'd been drawn to my attention by, once again, one of these lists from the Comics Should Be Good blog, although I can't remember exactly which one it was. It probably was one of these best miniseries or best stories that weren't Wolverine stories or something like that. I don't know. So it may have even been I don't think it was best Gambit stories. But, so I picked this up. I think I paid about $1 an issue or something like that. Maybe a little more with shipping, maybe more like $1.50 an issue. I don't feel like I completely wasted my money reading it. It doesn't make me want to read more, though. It like I said, it feels a little light in the character and the plot department, and a little just surface level. So those are my thoughts on the Gambit miniseries from 1993-1994. That's it for episode 48 of Dave Talks Comics. I want to point out again that there are 2 websites that I use frequently when I'm looking for information on comic books, and those are Comic Book DB, which can be found at comicbookdb.com, and the Grand Comics Database, which can be found at comics.org. And neither one of those sponsor this show. I just use them so much that I feel like I should give them some credit for helping me out. Anyhow, questions or comments can be posted on the episode page at davetalkscomics.com, or you can tweet them to @DaveTalksComics. Email your questions or comments to dave@davetalkscomics.com. Next time on Dave Talks Comics, I will be finally returning to my Who's Oh Hot Moo feature. After about a dozen episodes, I think, not covering it. And then I will also be talking about some more cartoon talk. I'll be talking about JLU and Young Justice. Thank you for listening.